This is Our Rough Draft, a podcast, real talk for real relationships.
Welcome to Our Rough Draft, where we share real stories from marriage, work, life, and the adventures along the way. We'll laugh, maybe get real, and hopefully help you spark some new conversations in your own life.
I'm Denise, the wild, emotional one who loves words and big ideas.
And I'm Tim. I'm the practical level one who fixes what she dreams of.
And this is Our Rough Draft, where we share the stories we're still living. Hello, welcome to Our Rough Draft.
Welcome.
So today we're going to take a little bit of a different stance, a little different format for this conversation. This will be a deep dive into one topic with really me asking the questions and you answering them.
Okay.
And the topic for today is to really talk about service. Leading into Veterans Day, we're going to have a whole Veterans Day episode. But before we do that, I just want to dive into your service, 21 years in the Army, and kind of what that meant to you and kind of lay that out.
Okay.
All right. So when you hear the word service, what's the first thing that comes to mind for you?
For me, I think it is I think there's a couple of important components. I think it's being of use to something or someone greater than yourself, meaning a concept, being of use or service to a concept, being of service to a group, being of service to the broader group, the bigger whole. It's something I think for the betterment of the whole is really what service means to me.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thanks.
You're welcome. All right, so let's start with the story itself. Like you've said before that you always thought that you would serve, but you joined the Army later than a lot of people do, later than our kids have joined the military.
Yeah.
That's interesting I hadn't thought about that before, but tell that story. Like, how did you do it? What was it like? What did you expect to get out of it?
I think for me, being graduating from high school, you get the calls from the recruiters, or you get,
Just dudes do.
Now it's text messages, but back then it was an actual phone call from recruiters, and they all want to sell you on the benefits of joining the military. And it was something that we just never talked about in my family. It was never presented as an option. Interesting to me that I think for a family where my dad didn't graduate college, my mom went to nursing school, higher education or the concept of moving on from high school to college was implied, but there was never a lot of pressure behind it. So I don't know why I felt like this other thing wasn't an option, but I just felt like it wasn't an option. I felt like the right thing to do was to say no to the recruiters. And I think all my friends at the time were saying no to the recruiters as well. So it just felt like what you did.
Well, I think Bellevue, Washington didn't say yes to recruiters a lot.
A lot. Yeah, I think that's probably true as well. And so, but I think there was always probably something in the back of my mind that was really curious about it. I mean, I was never really exposed to the military a whole lot growing up. I had relatives that were in the military, but it wasn't a big topic of conversation. I remember growing up in Yakima, we would drive by what was called the firing center at the time, is now known as the training center. But, you always knew when they were shooting at the firing center because there's always these loud booms that you could hear in town. So, I always was kind of interested in it. Yeah. I was adjacent to it and interested in it. But then the real light that came on was, I remember to this day, the first Gulf War. And at the time I was in community college, not really happy with community college, not really interested in doing it. But I remember seeing the pictures like we all did. I remember reading the stories. This was the first publicized, televised war that we had ever seen for the most part, live, kind of as it was happening. And I just remember thinking there was something bigger to serve. Like that was, you could debate whether or not it was a noble cause, but it was a cause. There was a very clear aggressor. There was a very clear mission of kicking that aggressor out of Kuwait. And so I remember thinking, there's people that do this because they believe in something bigger and something greater. And at the time, it really struck me and made me feel like I was missing out on something. That was in 91. It wasn't until 96, really. So 5 years of kind of grappling with that I decided to do something about it. Because at that point, when I joined, it was something I thought about almost literally every single day. I felt like I was missing out on. I felt like there was this hidden side to the world that I didn't know about. I felt like I wanted to do something bigger than myself. But I felt kind of hemmed in by the job that I had. I was married at the time. So there was all these, kind of reasons not to go active duty. And so the more I researched it, and I'm amazed that I did because it wasn't as easy to research.
Right.
You couldn't just go online and get all the information. You literally had to go and find the information. And so somehow I found my way to the National Guard and found that it was part-time, you could still serve. And then at the time I had a friend who was in the Guard, and explained a lot of stuff to me. And so went into the recruiter's office and said, I want to sign up and I want to go infantry.
And they were licking their
yeah,
chops.
and he was, and had to do all the stuff, had to take the
Yeah.
ASVAB and go, jump through all the hoops. But yeah, that was kind of what led me there. It was finally, I had to take care of that or it was going to drive me crazy. And it was going to be, I knew in my mind as clear as day that it was going to be a regret later in life. If I didn't do it, I was going to regret it. And I was 26 at the time.
Yeah.
Like you said, I was older than most people that joined the military. So I had a limited window to make that
So
happen.
you joined the National Guard and did all the normal National Guard things. So you would have drill on the weekends, 2 weeks in the summer, and then 9/11.
Yeah.
Am I missing anything before that?
Yeah. I mean, riots and fires.
Oh, yeah. Riots and fires. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So,
whale hunts.
Sorry. Yeah. Whale hunts. I think it wasn't riots until a little bit later. But yeah. So went off to boot camp at beautiful Fort Benning, Georgia.
Not beautiful. Wayward Home for Boys.
Yeah. The Fort Benning School for Wayward Boys. Graduated from boot camp, came back home and did the typical Guard thing. To your point, the 1 week in the month, 2 weeks in the summer. Almost immediately got sent up to Nia Bay because the Macaw tribe was resuming whale hunting, and there was going to be, according to everybody, massive protests with thousands of protesters trying to keep them from whaling, trying to, prevent them from doing that. And I was brand new to the Guard, and it was like, hey, pack your bags, you're going to go and you're going to, you get all this riot training and you have to do the stomp and drag and learn how to use the baton. And I was like, wow, this is, holy shit, this is serious. And we got up there. There was nothing.
There were like 15 hippies.
It was like crickets.
And Justin was one of them.
Yeah. Rolled into Nia Bay, which is about as far away as you can get in Washington and still be in Washington, literally right out there on the point of the Olympic Peninsula, and nothing. A couple of years later, got called out for the fires.
Within that,
Y2K.
What was the most rewarding mission that you did in the National Guard?
Domestic mission?
Yeah.
The fires, for sure. I think the fire, because I think there's two things. I think the fires that we got called out to, because the people were so grateful that people were there helping, and they showed the same level of gratitude to the firefighters. They showed the same to us. Like, it was just a very gratifying thing to drive down the road in the back of this open truck to the fire, and people were lining the sides of the road and they were thanking us, and there were signs and all that. So I think that was the first experience I had with serving your community, which was a big part of the Guard recruiting at the time, and I think still is serve your community, serve the community that you live in. And that was my chance to serve the community I lived in. And so it was super gratifying. And I think the same could be true for when we got back from the first tour and went down to Katrina in New Orleans. They were incredibly grateful to a person that we were there. And we interacted with a ton of the locals because we were just patrolling neighborhoods, and they would, talk to us and we would talk to them. And so that was a very gratifying thing to, again, serve. Wasn't my community because I didn't live there, but serve the community at the time. So super gratifying.
Yeah. And you were infantry. So when 9/11 happened, you knew right away that you would be called upon.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I don't think I was as certain as a lot of other people were. I think that I saw the writing on the wall that this was going to be a major thing, obviously. And I think we all knew that that was going to lead to a war of some kind.
Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't do that and not have consequences. And I think that what we didn't know was the extent of that. Obviously, I mean, hindsight being what it is, you look back on it and say, Afghanistan was the longest war in our country's history. And like, we were there for a million years. And, Iraq was a spin-off of what happened on 9/11. Although obviously been proven that it wasn't directly related, it was still spun up under the same guise. And so, yeah, I think we felt like something was going to happen, but didn't know quite what, and certainly never would have predicted that Iraq would happen after 9/11 and that we would then be going to Iraq. And I also think couldn't predict the extent to which both of those efforts and others at the time would rely on the National Guard and how critical the Guard would be to fill the ranks for both those missions.
And why was that?
Well, I mean, when you think about the size of the active duty force, and I'm not an expert on this, so I'm sure there's statistics that I could speak to, but I don't have them. I think the size of the active duty force probably after the Gulf War had been drastically reduced. So I think we got into a period of time where the bases were being closed and the military was reorganizing itself and becoming kind of a smaller, more lean organization, and then was not prepared to fight two wars. Although those two wars were not worlds apart, they were still in the same geographic area. It still required two separate sets of combat units, two separate sets of logistics and support, and all of the things that go along with fighting a war. And you just couldn't find all of that in the active duty military at the time. The Guard and the Reserve, all the reserve forces became critical at that point.
So I remember before that, you guys had been doing a lot of training and you were trying to do all the things that you needed to get the combat action badge, right? What is it called? Combat. The one without the blue behind it, right?
The Expert Infantry Badge.
Expert Infantry Badge.
Yep.
EIB.
EIB, right.
So you would sorry, I've been doing this a lot of years and I don't remember any of the words. But you guys had really, my brain, the way it took it in was you had to do all of these activities to earn this highest reward that you could get in the military. The highest non-combat thing you could do as an infantryman. And there was a lot of thought and a lot of work that went into that. And then you guys didn't do all of the activities because you got sent to Iraq. And within minutes of being in Iraq, you got the actual highest infantry badge you could get, the combat infantry badge.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
About the CIB in itself?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the CIB, so backstory, the CIB was established in 1943 during World War II because they were having trouble finding infantrymen. They were having trouble retaining people in the infantry during World War II. And so they thought that the prestige of having this separate award would be appealing and cause people to want to be in the infantry because it's something you wear in your uniform. It sets you apart. People know you're an infantryman because you have the CIB. And as a way to recognize people that had been through all of the ground combat that they had been through. And so that was, as an infantryman, I mean, the EIB is great. And people say, that, and for sure, the EIB is harder to earn than the CIB. The EIB, you have to test. You have to be expert in all of the skills that make you an infantryman, all the different things. And you only get a limited number of times to try and prove those skills. The CIB, you just have to have a war. And you have to be engaged in ground combat, technically. So, I mean, it kind of comes to you for the most part, in some cases. So fairly easy to earn, sometimes difficult to survive, but not super critical. I think for me, it felt weird to join the Guard as an infantryman because all we ever did was train. And in the back of my mind, I think even 21 years later in my career, I always felt a little bit of guilt for not being active duty. I always felt that little twinge of, I should have been active duty. I was only playing Army on the weekends. There's very much a thought, I think, even in some cases within the military, that the Guard and the Reserves play military. You do your 1 week in a month, 2 weeks in the summer. We know that that's not true. We know that typically it's more than 1 week in a month. Typically it's way more than 2 weeks in the summer. Like the Guard has turned into a de facto, almost full-time force in some cases. But there was still that piece of me that felt like, why did I join the infantry and the Guard? Because I'm not real infantry. And the worst thing that I could imagine being infantry in the Guard was to never, ever know if I was going to be capable of doing the job. Yes, I've trained on all these things. I can do all of these things. I've passed all of the training gates and stages. Like I've proven that I can do it in training. But what happens in the real world? And so for me, I think going on that first tour, getting the CIB for the action that we saw was a little bit of validation that I could do it. I have trained. I know what I'm doing. I'm an expert in the things that I do. And this is almost like it was kind of proof of that for me. So
Yeah.
I think it was important in that regard.
So tell us about that first tour. What were your responsibilities? What was it like?
I think we were a little bit shocked. So at the time, guard units, they were being deployed, if I remember correctly, they're being deployed in kind of pieces, meaning a unit could say, we need a company-sized element to supplement this group over here. And you know, Department of Defense could reach into the National Guard and say, we need a infantry company to go here. And I think they tried to do that to us and tried to split us up even more than we were split up. And instead, our leadership said, no, we are keeping things whole. You can have our entire brigade. So at the time, it was the 81st Brigade within the Washington Army National Guard. Take our whole brigade. You can piece out the brigade if you want and put it in different places, but you have to do it in larger chunks. Meaning our battalion stayed together, our larger battalion. So all of our companies were operating in relatively the same space. We were scared to death that we were just going to get put guarding a gate, guarding something, like literally menial work that didn't utilize our skills, didn't do anything. Like I was scared to death that was going to happen. And for the longest time, we didn't know what our mission was going to be. Ultimately, they attached our battalion to the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Cavalry Division based out of Fort Hood, Texas. So we were technically part of the 1st Cavalry Division, 3rd Brigade, that had responsibility for a area of operation, an AOR, within Baghdad and then kind of south and slightly southeast of the Baghdad city center.
Because it followed a river.
Because it followed a river that was the cradle of civilization.
Details.
Intersection of the Tigris and Euphrates River. So to our joy, I guess.
Yeah, I think so.
They literally just gave us a section of the map and said, go and patrol, go and do your things. And they took our company because we had Bradley fighting vehicles and assigned us to Charlie Company, which only brought Humvees, did not have any up-armored vehicles. And so our platoon, my platoon that I was in, went to Charlie Company to give them some heavy armor capabilities. And one of their platoons came to Alpha Company to give them some mobility. And so the whole thing was a little bit of a shuffling. But ultimately, we just went out and did patrols. And so we would run night and day patrols. They would give us missions, go here, secure this. There's a raid happening here, and here's what's going to go on. And so we just ran missions.
Here's where the bad guys are.
Go find them. Yeah. So we had a mission cycle that essentially was made up of 3 separate things. First one being patrols. So you would go on a patrol cycle and you would run all those missions. So those missions would come down. Here's the area we think the bad guys are in. Go find them. Second mission was QRF, Quick Reaction Force, being forward staged. So our base was a little bit removed from our AOR, but there was a forward base that we would stay at with all of our elements, and we would sit there and basically wait for bad shit to happen in the AOR and then go out and fix it. And so you would get a call at any given moment, hey, troops in contact, they need support. You would spin up, you'd be on this constant ready cycle for that time. So you'd be minutes away from leaving. And then the third one would be kind of a rest and refit with FOB security. So going back to our actual base, you would pull security and guard towers, you would do prisoner guard sometimes, but that was a kind of a rest cycle of being back at the main base. And then that would just rotate throughout the course of the entire year that we were there.
And I think there's this piece, like you always talk about guilt, but like there's this piece of like, I'm not real Army, but now you were.
Mm-hmm.
And then the guilt came in that you were now real Army and you had a family at home.
Yeah. Like, what did I do?
Yeah.
Well, and I think that guilt, I mean, I think that again, I was early in my career, I was worried about, am I ever going to get to do anything real? So the training's fine, but am I ever going to get to do anything real? And yes, the state deployments are fine, but is there ever going to be a war, ever going to be a conflict where I'd ever have to go? And then all of a sudden we got those orders, and you and I talk about this all the time. I remember those orders, and in military orders, there's, you're going here at this date and time, and you're going to do this for a period of, and my order said not, and I remember it clearly, not less than 545 days. 545 days from the date of those orders to me was unfathomable. I had no idea. Like I couldn't even calculate in my head how long that was. It's obviously over a year, but how long is that? And then in my mind, and in retrospect, it seems kind of, ridiculous to say this, but at the time, in my mind, that meant that was the extent of my life, potentially.
Yeah.
Because you never know. I mean,
Right. People didn't come back.
I could live for another week. I could live for another 50 years. I have no
Right.
idea what that looks like. But for me, that piece of paper that said 545 days was as far out as I could see. Because at
Right.
any point in that 545 days, bad shit could happen and I might not come back home. So I felt like it was a very, very surreal feeling to feel like there was an end date, like an expiration
Yeah.
date on my life.
Yes. Absolutely. So you have said this now twice, I think, the bad shit. Can you share a little bit about what some of those things were that you had to respond to?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the patrol cycle was constant. So it was kind of, people are constantly out in the AOR day and night running patrols, and sometimes things would happen. Sometimes they would be in contact. We were on QRF at one point, so we were forward staged at that base, and everybody was ready. And so whenever a mission would go out, we would then again be spun up, and we'd be sitting in the vehicles, ready to go.
Trying to stay awake.
And trying to stay awake. Yeah, people listening to music, watching movies, whatever it was. But literally all of us on the vehicles, and that would last for whatever amount of time the units were out in patrol or in the OR. And one night, Charlie Company was running a mission like super late or early in the morning. And so we were on standby, and then we got the word that they had taken contact and there was a casualty, or I think multiple casualties. And so we needed to go out and secure the area and provide assistance. And so we got in the Bradleys and rolled out, and it was not far from where we were staged. So we got there pretty quickly. And as it turns out, one of Charlie Company's soldiers had been shot in the head, as it turned out. And so there was just some amount of chaos when we got there, trying to figure out how we were going to medevac him back to the FOB, how we were going to get him medical help, what the vehicle was going to be, who was going to go with the vehicle, security element, what we were going to do to try and find the person or people that shot him. Like, there was just a lot going on at that point. And that kind of speaks to the chaos of when shit goes bad, it gets chaotic. And the best leaders are the ones that can make order out of that chaos and can create decisions in the moment amidst all of that. Our leadership made the decision that we were going to secure the perimeter because we had Bradley's big, armored vehicles. We were going to kick out our dismounts, and we were going to provide security so that they could then deal with this casualty situation. And so we pushed out into a field that had houses behind it, and all the houses, like, it's different than here. Arizona is actually a lot more similar, but most of the houses there are not houses on a street. They're houses behind walls. So neighborhoods have walls, and every house has a wall and then a courtyard. So there's just lots of dead space, lots of places that you can't see. And so I got the vehicles arranged in the way that we wanted them. And then my gunner and I were looking out and kind of scanning the area to see if we could find anybody. And through the thermal sights, saw these two people peek from around the wall. And so my gunner zeroed in on that spot, and I told him to watch that spot and make sure that nothing was, creeping up on us. I let the dismounts know, here's what we see, here's the direction and distance, so they could be aware of it, so nobody was sneaking up on them. Because again, it's pitch black, it's the middle of the night. And they came back out from behind, these two people came back out from behind the wall again and threw something at us, or threw something in our direction, at least through the thermals. I could see something fly our way. So I immediately thought it was probably a grenade, or it was something, they were taking a shot at us, basically. And so I told my gunner, I said, if anything, if whatever they threw, I couldn't tell what it was. If whatever they throw blows up or something else blows up, kill him. Like, keep your gun on him, be ready to fire. He was on him, reticle was on him, ready to fire. Nothing blew up. And so ultimately I decided not to, because that was the rule of engagement. No hostile intent. But at the same time, we were all dealing with the emotions. Like, we had just heard over the radio that Schmunk had died, that he was KIA. And so that we were dealing with all of those emotions of somebody out here somewhere hiding in the shadows just killed one of our own, and we want revenge. And it sounds horrible because you're supposed to be very professional. You're supposed to be very, locked in. Like, there's rules of engagement that tell you X, Y, and Z. You engage in these situations, but not in these situations. I figured those were the people that shot him. It's 2:00 in the morning. There's a curfew. Nobody else should be out and about. Who's going to be running around except for the bad guys? But I couldn't tell Through the thermals, I couldn't tell. I don't know how high the wall is, and I don't know how their relationship to the height of the wall translates to an actual human size. It could have been two adults that were over there with bad intentions. It could be two kids that snuck out of their house and were throwing rocks at the Americans. And I just remember in retrospect, I mean, it wasn't until like years later I thought, like, because I held a lot of guilt about that.
Yeah.
I could have killed the people that killed Schmuck.
That would have felt good.
And it would have felt
Right.
like retribution. But I remember then thinking later on when I was more objective about it, like, what if it had turned out the other way? What if it turned out that we killed these people and then we, sat around waiting for daylight so we could figure out what was going on? And I walked over there and it was, two 10-year-old kids that were out throwing rocks, like no threat whatsoever, had no involvement. They weren't the ones that pulled the trigger on Schmunk. Like, I can't imagine living with that. So it's like you're just kind of fucked one way or another. Like, do you do one thing and feel guilty about it, or you do the other thing or not do something and you feel guilty about that? Like, there's just no easy decisions.
Yeah.
That's the bad shit.
Yeah, for sure. And other things I think that happened were cars driving up on places where they shouldn't be. And, going through that perimeter and then having to fire on those. And so you'd have to respond to those. IEDs were big during that deployment.
Mm-hmm.
I think RPGs kind of came later. That was kind of the second tour more.
Maybe
No?
the first tour.
Really?
Yeah, they're a big part of the first tour.
Awesome. There was so much of this that I didn't ask about at the time. Basically, can you explain an IED, I guess, is what I'm asking.
IED stands for improvised explosive device. So it can be anything. Because at the time when the regime fell, there was no laws, essentially. I mean, it was chaos. And so in the fog of that chaos, I think a lot of explosives were looted from different places and people had access to things. There's countries that were sending stuff into Iraq, supportive of the insurgency. And so there's just all of this material around. So it could have been anything. I mean, but it was anything that was rigged to blow up, basically. And so it was typically something that was planted in a road, in the side of the road, underneath the road, in culverts that ran underneath the road, in different forms and fashions, different ways that they could essentially use them to blow vehicles up. And it ranged from, small with no damage. The first one that we hit was pretty small, put a hole in the armor, but didn't do any major damage, all the way up to things that were catastrophic and destroyed vehicles and destroyed humans. So it could kind of span that range. And the problem that we faced was they got much better about it.
Yeah.
They got much sneakier about it because for the most part, initially they had to be triggered. So you had to wire it to something. They would wire it to a cell phone and then they would call the cell phone and that electric signal would then trigger the IED. And so there had to be somebody close by. So we would jam the signals, jam all the electronic signals in the area. Some were pressure plates, meaning you drove over it and then a second later it would blow up. And so we had to watch for differences in the road. Some were like remotely detonated. I mean, there's just all of these really kind of interesting ways that they would have of detonating the IEDs. So we were constantly trying to adapt the countermeasures to be able to not get impacted by those.
Yeah, and I bring it up because I think that was one of the harder things for you transitioning back was the long commute and being on roads.
Yeah, I think during the first tour, there were far less rules during the first tour than there were during the second tour. I think even in that short span of time, things had changed in terms of how we approached the civilian populace. But during the first tour, we kind of still had complete autonomy on where we went and how we went there. And so, meaning we didn't allow anybody to get close to us in a vehicle because they would also pack vehicles with explosives and blow those up. And those were hugely devastating. I mean, just because of the sheer amount of explosives, those were our biggest concern. So vehicles were never allowed near us. So if you got too close, warning shots. If you got closer than that, it would be lethal action because it would be unacceptable to allow a vehicle to get close to you. So I remember being in a Humvee at one point, driving out to the AOR, and there was a vehicle that pulled off of a side street and got in front of us. And the driver of the Humvee literally, basically ran that vehicle off the road, got it behind, pushed, kept pushing, turning the vehicle back and forth. And finally the car skidded off the side of the road, kind of crashed in the ditch. But that was perfectly acceptable. That was us taking care of our own and securing our column. So vehicles were a big deal. Didn't want anybody around you. constantly scanning the environment. Is there a difference in the pavement? Do I see trash on the side of the road? Because they would hide IEDs in dead animals. They would hide them in tires. They would hide them under trash bags. They would hide them in the middle of the road in trash bags. Like if you blinked for a second, you could miss the thing that was going to blow you up. And so it just, all of that is not favorable to somebody who's commuting a long distance because you're constantly worried about that. Is there somebody on the on-ramp as you pass under an overpass that's going to come drive and get in your formation and blow you up? I mean, because that was a tactic as well, was sneaking a car into your formation and then blowing it up and people die. So yeah, that was kind of a no-go.
Yeah. What would you want me to ask you that I haven't so far? That's always my question. Bad question. All right. I guess let's shift into this idea of your identity post deployments, because you went in to the military to serve and then you've served. Like, who are you now? Who were you after those deployments? And was it what you wanted?
I think selfishly it was what I wanted because of that question of, could I do it? I think learning about yourself is really, really valuable in any capacity. It doesn't have to be going to combat to learn about yourself, right? Like, I mean,
I would hope not.
In this case, can I operate in a dangerous, stressful environment where the consequences are extreme? The consequences of messing up or not doing your job are really extreme. Can I operate when I'm tired? I haven't slept in 30 hours. I'm hungry. All of these kind of physical things are pressing on you. Can you still work through all of that? Can you maintain your focus and your concentration to do the job? Can you operate when you're scared? Can you operate when somebody else is scared? Can you make the right decisions as a leader, with the pressure of making a decision one way or another? Can you do that kind of stuff? So I think in that regard, I learned things about myself that I may not have learned. Not to say it's impossible, but it's probably unlikely that I would have learned the same things just in general civilian life. So yeah, I think that was hugely valuable. And it sounds weird to say I value that experience because of what it is, but I value that experience for what it gave me both times. I would do it again in a heartbeat, not because of the bad parts of it, but because of the good parts of it. Because we had a podcast where we talked about favorite jobs, right? And I think one of the things we talked about was feeling like an expert, knowing what you're doing and being valued for what you do. I think those times in my life, I was the expert. I was the one that knew what I was doing. Nobody had to tell me my job because I knew my job inside and out, and I trained my people to know their job inside and out. And we did our jobs and we did it really, really well. So that feeling of I know what I'm doing and I'm an expert in this, I think is really valuable as well.
And I think that's part of the maybe grief process of coming back. It's not the same.
Right.
Like life.
Right. Well, yeah. And I think that was the hardest part of coming back the first time and I think that was the hardest part about being in the Guard. Especially, it's hard enough to come back to a Monday full of meetings after you've been, during the weekend doing training on clearing a city, clearing a town, right? Like close quarters kinds of stuff. That training is super stressful and high speed and it's really technical and you're doing all these things. And then you come back on Monday morning and you're sitting through a meeting where, people are talking about X, Y, or Z. And I think, so that's hard enough just on a regular basis, but then coming back from combat to that environment, coming back from an environment where literally there were life and death decisions, where things were super critical and you were in a war zone, and coming back and hearing people talk about critical problems. And you have to, like, the hardest part for me was having to reset my filters, because you can come back and be very, very resentful of the world around you. You can be resentful of your coworkers, your family, everybody else who doesn't see or who sees things as being bigger and more challenging than they really are. And so, and that's not anybody else's problem. That's my problem. That's the individual's problem. You have to reset that filter of saying, yeah, this is not super critical in the grand scheme of things in life or death, but it's critical in this moment to this person for this reason. And I have to be able to adjust to that and respect that. And that's a really hard transition to make from, coming back and was it March or April of 2005, and 2 weeks later being back at work, sitting in my,
Right.
sitting at my desk and, having to think about Starbucks problems all of a sudden.
I still like bristle at when people will say, well, it's a war zone, or I'm like, you just don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's hard. It's like I said, you just have to be able to reset that.
Yeah.
I was very ignorant of post-traumatic stress. And so I would bristle at people that said, oh, I've got a lot of PTSD from this meeting that I was just in or from this thing that I'm doing. And I would immediately take offense at that. And I never said anything outwardly, but it was always this kind of reaction, this negative reaction of, you have no idea. But then I also have to realize that like trauma, which is the central part of that, trauma is trauma. Like I can't judge what your trauma is. I can't judge its impact on you. I can't judge the, how it plays a role in your life and your reaction to it. So I have to stop thinking of PTSD as being a monopoly that only soldiers feel, because that is 100% not true.
Right. But I think what it draws on is like you have to be super skilled at empathy, because if it's a comparison, it can't be, but you have to be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think that sense of empathy is really difficult to muster sometimes, because you're dealing with your own processing of the situation of the thing that you went through, and somebody drawing comparisons, like to your point, somebody in a business setting or somebody in any setting saying, oh, it's a real war zone out there.
Yeah.
Not at all. Nothing's blowing up. You're not getting shot at. Nobody's dying. Just let's pull back from that language a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for diving deep today with me on that. I think what you just said about how you would do it again, I think that is the sentiment that we both feel.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we would do it again. I love the life lessons that we each learned during those deployments, and the service was real, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone else.
Well, and those are very interesting sentiments too, with two of our children now in the military. And I think it's interesting. It feels probably like when we explain to people that our two oldest are in the military, I think it probably feels like a no duh moment to them. Like they probably assume that, our house has been all about raising kids to go into the military. And that's just never been the case for us. Like that was my thing. That was the thing that was important to me. And they understood how important it was to me and to us as a family. And I think we never shied away from the topic or the conversation, but we also then never twisted arms and said, this is something that you have to do. I think famously, we've always said to them, service is critical. Service to something is important. And whether that's through a nonprofit, whether it's through the Peace Corps, whether it's through who knows what.
Now the Army and the Navy.
Yeah, but you should consider giving back to the greater good. Yeah. And this is how they've chosen to do it. So while we wouldn't wish it on anybody else, we are still going through it in our own family. So.
Yeah, because obviously they love us because they both did ASU, which was my thing. And now they're both doing the military, which was your thing.
Right.
It is a really important way to serve. And I think today can think of the military in a lot of different ways. And so I think it's important that we talk about that service and why and how it shows up.
Yep.
So that it's not a meme or a characterization, but it's actual humans behind it.
Yep.
Doing the good work. So thank you.
Agreed. You're welcome.
Awesome. Okay. So it's okay to do a deep dive sometimes and hear some one person side of the story. So I would encourage you to think about those things in your own relationships that matter and set aside some time to talk about it.
Indeed.
Awesome.
Thanks for deep diving.
You're welcome. All right. We'll see you later.
Bye, everyone.
Oh, oh.